Attention! It's the last warning. We call for an immediate end to the war in the north of Spain. On April 26, 1937, the German Condor Legion aircraft, together with the Italian Air Force and the coup army that revolted against the Republican government, got involved in the Spanish Civil War. They bombed the small town of Guernica for 3 long hours. The bombardment left more than 300 civilians dead, people who had mainly taken refuge in shelters. The air raids destroyed 75% of the monuments in the historical city of Basque.
I was a little child when Guernica was bombed, and I've heard the story from my mother. It was a peaceful village in which everyone lived happily. Like other villages in its neighborhood, the people in Guernica were living as a big family.
For years, even during the era of Franco's dictatorship, people in Guernica have held ceremonies to mark the anniversary of this appalling tragedy and honor their freedom. Each year in Guernica, they introduce new proposals to prevent violation of individual and collective rights at the international level.
On the day of bombardment, I started to sense the danger as I noticed a strange situation and heard some shootings. I was a terrified little child. I thought of escaping to Lumo village. Later on, while I was scared to death, I found myself on the road to Muxica. It was 9:30 a.m.
75 years ago in April, on a local market day, the air raid sirens went off in Guernica.
My father was serving in the Basque army. First he was in Asturias region, and later he had to go to the front line by lottery. His battalion was stationed in Lacatio region at the time of bombardment. In the absence of my father, my mother was cutting the grass to feed the livestock. My mother had found a dead man while she was on her way and then heard the sirens. She said that later another dead body was found below the Renteria bridge that was built over a broad river. She could describe the scene clearly and knew the victims by their names.
My parents were searching for me. Frightened, I gradually went forward and reached the backside of Josefina's, where I met a woman from Segundo Olaeta, a famous school. Then 2 cousins of mine, Gerardo and Fernando, and I found a stream. We were in a high altitude and decided to swim in that deep stream. We could see the small aircrafts and their pilots from behind. The first aircraft dropped a bomb on Renteria. Then another group of 3 aircrafts appeared, probably en route from Vitoria. We could see them pretty as well as we were in a hole with our heads stretched out. So I have recorded every detail of the scene in my mind like a camera. The bombs were dropped manually from the aircrafts. Some bombs were as big as this and some others were small.
German and Italian fighter jets dropped more than 28 tons of bombs on the city. Most of those bombs were dropped by Junkers Ju-52 cargo planes of the German Condor Legion, commanded by this man, Sergeant von Richthofen. The fighter aircraft took off from Burgos Airport, controlled by the dictatorship in power at the time. Savoia Marchetti SM-79 were among the aircraft that took off from Soria, the region previously captured by pro-General Franco groups.
German troops looked at Guernica's offensive and Spanish Civil War as a preparation for the Second World War. This was attested by Göring during the Nuremberg War trials. Although the case was not addressed in depth, Göring stated that the German troops took the opportunity of the Spanish Civil War to carry out some military tests. Guernica's raid was the first widespread, unremitting and long air operation that was launched on a defenseless town. The massacre of civilians took 3 hours and ended at 1845 when the last German aircraft left the Guernica's sky. When Hitler won the 1933 election, he started to reorganize German troops that were defeated in the First World War. The bombing of Guernica was the first operation of the German Condor Legion that was expert on carrying out bomb operations. The bombing continued in a periodic and systematic way until the city was leveled.
From 6 in the afternoon, the sorties intensified. 1/4 of the bombs dropped over the area were incendiary. Following the raid, escort troops that had been dispatched from Vitoria and had been monitoring the situation opened machine gun fire on the people. The sirens stopped sounding an hour and 30 minutes later.
Later it was claimed that there were some targets of great military significance in Guernica. For instance, they spoke of Renteria Bridge. It came as a surprise that despite systematic bombing, the bridge remained unharmed. The air raid paved the way for similar bomb attacks to be carried out in the Second World War. There was no attack on military targets. Rather, the strike took the lives of civilians. Later, the buildings and streets were annihilated by the incendiary bombs. Guernica was the first of this kind of bomb attacks. I would like to quote a sentence from Manuel Leguniche, a scholar and journalist from Guernica who writes about the Second World War. He is a journalist and has conducted an exhaustive research on the Second World War. Actually, he records eyewitness accounts of the second half of the 20th century.
Bombing civilians was unprecedented in Europe. Rif War took place in one of the colonial regions. The colonialists justified their attack on Rif under the excuse that the tribal people were barbarian and uncivilized. The incendiary bombs used in the Rif War contained toxic gases, but bombing civilians in Guernica was the first of its kind in Europe. Undoubtedly, the Spanish Civil War could be singled out as the reason behind these bomb attacks. Whether the bombs were ordinary or incendiary, the only thing that matters is the massacre of civilians.
We were living next to the cemetery and we noticed that every night a van would carry 6 to 7 dead bodies to the mountainous area at the top of the cemetery. To play in the area, we made dares to gather the bombs which were scattered over the region. What a crazy act! How ignorant we were! In fact, we were playing with our lives.
It was only me and my mum since my early childhood. Guernica was gradually rebuilt and we were playing in the ruins until we were 10 or 12 years old.
The military campaign sought to get the upper hand in the air. The allies of the coup army were on the watch in their bases in Burgos, Sarria, and Vitoria-Gasteiz, awaiting the right time to bomb the city. The small group of the Basque military and the militia had no chance of giving a response. The debilitated Republican army could not dominate the land captured by Franco's army. They bombed the small towns such as Uchanto and Durango near the enemy borders. The Spanish people have a more vivid memory of the Andalusia, Barcelona, and Alicante bombings. Still, Guernica remains the hardest-hit victim, and political propaganda played a critical role in the civil war that raged on in it.
Through widespread propaganda, the fascists poisoned the public opinion. Recently, an article from Juan Pablo Fusi, a contemporary and competent Spanish historian, is published in El País newspaper. He explains how this great and unprecedented tragedy happened in Guernica.
Iñaki Bagatin made a 5-minute video from a rocket launched to Navarro. The video shows the confessions made by Iribarren, an amateur attorney who later became Mola's secretary. Iribarren took part in Mola's negotiations with the Spanish generals and heard them saying, "Let's level the city." The Spanish authorities made a foolish mistake. In his speech on April 27th, Lehendakari Aguirre, president of Basque, said, "The fighter planes couldn't fly today due to weather conditions." As the bombing took place on April 26th, the Spanish people called him a liar who wanted to evade his responsibility by relating the case to climatic conditions. Although we all knew what had happened, we wouldn't talk about it. While we were all informed that we were at war and the city was bombarded by the German aircraft, the official documents say that we, the people of Basque, opened fire on Guernica. This is while the city was set on fire from the top. Everybody knew what was happening, not via the media, rather from a sentence written on an election leaflet.
Why was Guernica bombed? Well, it wasn't the first, the bloodiest, or the most destructive of wars. Despite its military significance, the Guernica bombing didn't play a crucial role in the fall of Bilbao that came about 2 months later. The Gudaris Battalion, including soldiers from the Basque region and the Acantinado Battalion, were stationed in La Villa. Loyola was in the Santa Clara Monastery, Seseta in Las Carmelatas Monastery, and Guernica Garcolas was based in a school. Taking into account the refugees that fled from the borders and excluding the nomadic neighbors, Guernica had a population of 7,000. It has always been the symbol of Basque's freedom. Renteria Bridge was declared a military target to prevent the troops' retreat. This while the weapons factory and some other industrial units survived unscathed.
Guernica has been the symbol of freedom for the Basque people. They planned to massacre the Basque nation and had their own reasons. The government decided to punish the Basque people when it was informed of close ties between them and the Republicans. This is while people in Guernica were very weak and emotional.
Guernica was a small town with a population of 5,700 and no military importance. A weapons factory comprised of some companies called Astra and a repair shop were considered as the only industrial units of Guernica. They justified the bombing of the town with the excuse of preventing the retreat of the Basque troops that were coming from Guipuzcoa. The troops had lost Las Inchortas area and started to retreat. But the Guernica's people, as well as all the people in that region, knew that destruction of Renteria Bridge was not a barrier to the army's advance, because you could pass some parts of the Guernica's river on foot without using a boat or a bridge. The town was of no importance in terms of population and industry. It didn't even have a strategic military significance. It was just a small town. But Guernica has moral value. Its history dates back to the Middle Ages, and it's of symbolic significance for the Basque people for two reasons. First, it was home to a church in La Casa de Juntas, in which people took an oath under an oak tree that stood there for hundreds of years. The Spanish authorities had to take an oath to uphold the fueros, or local laws, of Biscay. These oaths are nothing more than the common rights and laws of the country, such as the laws of inheritance and the authorities' codes of conduct. These laws have been handed down from generation to generation. In the 13th century, the Spanish kings who entered Biscaya had to take the oath to be considered the Biscaya's noblemen. This ceremony was just held in Guernica, neither in Bilbao nor in any other town. Because of Iglesia Juradera, a church where the oath was sworn, Guernica has been the symbol of freedom for the Basque people. The foreign kings had to take an oath to respect our customs, otherwise they were not recognized in Spain. Second, they intended to bomb Guernica, the symbol of freedom for the Basque nation. On April 28th, Alba said that Guernica had neither strategic nor military importance and was only bombed to terrorize the people.
There were two reasons to wage an all-out war against the civilians of the town. First, since late March 1933, General Franco's supporters were prepared to make an advance towards the north and take Bizkaia. The borders were secure due to the resistance of the Gudaris and pro-Republican militia groups in El Gutaya, Aibar, and Ochandiano since October 1936. Their failure to comply with Madrid in late March made them attack the northern border line. They bombed Guernica following the attack of Durango on March the 31st, 1937, to compensate their slow progress in war. They also intended to scare people and show them the might of Franco's army in line with Mola's frequent threats. In the leaflets distributed as part of election campaign, Mola had addressed Gudaris and the militia groups in the Basque language and had said, "I will devastate the whole Bizkaia if you continue to resist." They punished a specific group of people to teach them a lesson. In fact, they aimed to compensate their failed attempts to invade Bizkaia 1 month earlier. But why the heaviest air raid took place in Guernica and not in Sornosa or Aibar? Guernica is of symbolic importance for the Basque people. This is why headquarters of El Arbol Institute is situated in Guernica. When Republicans were in power, some movements, such as the movement of municipalities to achieve autonomy, had had their origins in Guernica. It was a symbolic town.
Due to Guernica's great significance, an artist like Picasso allocated a painting to this town. Something painted by Picasso is of highest value. The Picasso's painting, as well as the article written by Stier in the Times, played a crucial role in informing the people of the world of what had happened in Guernica.
It is because of the Picasso's painting that today the world knows about Guernica more than before. The painting's contract was signed between Picasso and the Republican government in 1937 in Paris. This painting was brought here at the era of the democratic government in 1981 by the Union of Democratic Center, or UCD, and it belongs to the Spanish government. Today, this painting is kept in the Reina Sofia Museum that represents an aristocratic family. Picasso had sold his artwork to a Republican government, and for sure he wouldn't have been happy had he known that his artwork is being kept in such a place.
The Guernica's bombing provoked reactions at an international level for two reasons. First, Steer was a competent journalist, quite different from the yellow journalists who make their reports while lounging in their hotel rooms. Steer was residing in Macrada, Picinia, and came here to do something positive. Steer knew that his respective country, Britain, that had previously announced its neutrality, had to be involved in the war and had to help the legitimate Republican government of Spain and the Basque. In his article published in The Times on April 28, Steer gives a detailed account of the Guernica's bombing by the German Air Force. The next day, Spanish fascists kidnapped Buchita, one of the intellectuals of Basque who was accompanying a group of French journalists as a translator. The fascists made the French journalists write a report and portray the Basque people as being behind the Guernica's bombing and setting it afire. The French government was informed of the case. Later, on May 12, the Le Humanitaire, the daily newspaper linked to the French Communist Party, denounced the report as a lie and pointed the finger of blame at Franco's supporters. In addition to Steer's article and Picasso's painting, the exhibition of 1937 in Paris was a key factor. As the Spanish people maintained their legitimacy in their fight against the Franco's regime, they were allowed to have their own pavilion at the 1937 Paris International Exhibition. They asked Picasso to paint a scene of the war. Although he was a committed artist, Picasso had no idea what to do. Guernica's sudden air raids on April 26 made Picasso, who had been previously working on some images of cows and horses, create the painting of Guernica. Guernica is probably the most famous and the clearest painting that depicts opposition to war. Actually, it was a great help to the Basque people and all those who were at war against fascism.
They say money is the root of all evil. Well, nowhere is it more true than in U.S. politics. The 2012 U.S. presidential and congressional elections were the most expensive in history, costing $6 billion. But who paid this money, and what did he, she, or they expect in return? Hello, I'm Shire Dianadnejad, and you're watching Aperture. So how about the American people, the so-called electorate, the 99%? Is it their vote or the top 1%'s cash? Who are the true kingmakers and puppet masters behind the scene? For that and more, let's watch this week's documentary, The Money Lobby.
Last week, the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests.
Campaign finance law has made a mockery of our political campaign season. We really ought to let campaigns raise the money they need and just get rid of these super PACs.
Government makes choices that affect all of our lives, and so we really have to make sure that we get the big money out of our government and get the voters back in.
You have agreed with the characterization that Governor Romney is a liar. Look at him now. Do you stand by that claim?
It is your former staff running the PAC. It is your millionaire friends giving the PAC.
Well, of course it's former staff of mine. And of course there are people who support me. They wouldn't be putting money into a PAC that supports me if there were people who support me.
In a sharp about-face today, the Obama re-election campaign told its financial contributors that they should feel free to contribute to so-called super PACs.
And the race for the White House shaping up to be an expensive general election battle.
We're decreasing the power of average citizens to influence the political outcome of the election. And we're increasing the influence of businesses and commercial interests. I mean, what does this mean not only for the electoral process, but what does this mean for our democratic decision-making process?
We're never really going to get a sense of the magnitude of who was behind the scenes pulling the strings.
Today, 4 years from the excitement of that last election, for the first time, the majority of Americans now doubt that our children will have a better future. It's not what we were promised.
The choice you face won't just be between two candidates or two parties. It will be a choice between two different paths for America. A choice between two fundamentally different visions for the future.
Mr. President, take your campaign of division and anger and hate back to Chicago and let us get about rebuilding and reuniting America.
I ask you tonight for your vote. If you reject the notion that this nation's promise is reserved for the few, your voice must be heard in this election. If you reject the notion that our government is forever beholden to the highest bidder, you need to stand up in this election.
The 2012 presidential race was the most expensive in the history of the United States. Interestingly enough, a significant amount of that money did not come from spending by campaigns, but rather from outside groups. This spending by super PACs and similar groups has changed the face of campaign and elections in the United States. I invited my friends over to discuss this issue and watch the final presidential debate. Terry, who works at a nonprofit at Columbia University, Eneda, a former student of mine who did research on Occupy Wall Street, and Mehmet, a colleague of mine at State University of New York.
I'm sure they'll address it, but I don't think either candidate is going to say anything different.
So
really,
let's
when
check
it comes
this
to substance
out,
on
guys.
them.
It's starting right now.
That we would go after those who killed Americans, and we would bring them to justice, and that's exactly what we're going to do. But I think it's
I know in I think the 2004 elections, there I think over $1 billion combined by the two presidential campaigns. So they had spent in total over $1 billion back in 2004. This had been a trend for a while, the increased amount of spending. And of course, that was before the Citizens United decision. So the trend in spending had already been increasing in massive amounts. But with the recent Citizens United ruling, spending has increased not just by presidential campaigns, but by outside groups, of course, trying to influence what's happening in terms of trying to influence voter decisions and influence the public on which way to go. So private interest is now directly involved in the presidential campaigns. But I think this has obvious implications about who's running, who can run. And you have to be a rich man now to run. Rich man with connections, of course, who can then collect the money that they need in order to be able to run. So what we understand as a democratic process seems more like a
right. And what it means for individuals who want to give small amounts of money. I mean, does that matter at all? Like if I want to make a small donation to a political campaign, like if that's going to be countered by a huge donation.
It's interesting you say that because a lot of my friends that were so enthusiastic about voting in 2008 are not voting this year for the same reason that you said. This is my first time to vote because I just became a citizen and I'm looking forward to that. But I'm a little bit disappointed in how the funding is, it's just crowding basically the voices, our voices. And but if we don't vote, then what's left? Then the hope is completely gone. At least I know that that's all I have for now. It's my vote. Whether it matters or not, at least it keeps people engaged in the process, in the debate. And hopefully things will change 4 years from now, 8 years from now, where it would really make a difference.
As we're talking about the super PAC, it's a great example because many would argue this means privatization of politics. Big interests, be it public or private, commodify the public sphere by influencing or sponsoring one or another public entity. And then this inevitably results in lack of transparency, lack of accountability. So then what is democracy? I mean, this is the big question.
Big bosses of the political field, the beneficiaries of privilege in the field of industry, the men who represent that sinister alliance between crooked politics and crooked business, which has done more than anything else for the corruption of American life, are united as one man against the genuine rule of the people themselves. They can't make terms with the men who honestly and genuinely represent the popular will.
After Teddy Roosevelt's campaign was dirtied by a large corporate fundraising scandal, public outcry led to the passage of the 1907 Tillman Act, which is America's first attempt at campaign finance reform, banning campaign contributions by corporations. The Publicity Act of 1910 enacted the first donor disclosure requirements. In 1947, with the Taft-Hartley Act, Congress expanded the ban on contributions to unions. In reaction, unions set up the first political action committees, or the PACs, which went on to become a major force in the world of American campaign finance.
The argument was that labor was now becoming as powerful as corporations and they should be treated the same. And this leads to a new round of campaign finance regulation. In 1971, Congress passes the Federal Election Campaign Act, which has some spending limits in it and a lot improved disclosure. And then in 1974, in response to Watergate, Congress revises those laws and now imposes fairly tight limits on both contributions to candidates, spending by candidates, contributions to and spending by parties, and spending by independent groups supporting or opposing candidates, and enhanced disclosure, and also adopts for the first time a public funding system for presidential candidates.
The Supreme Court had a major impact on campaign finance in 1976, where the court said that money is an expression of speech, so therefore individual spending cannot be restricted. Amendments in 1979 to the Federal Election Campaign Act paved the way for what became known as soft money, which allows corporations, unions, and individuals to give unlimited amounts to national campaign committees for party-building activities, famously benefiting Bill Clinton.
McCain-Feingold, which was passed in 2002 and the Supreme Court upholds in 2003, in a way is a restoration of the campaign finance system that existed in the late 70s, early 80s, before soft money and issue advocacy began to drive big holes into it.
In 2010, two major court decisions paved the way for the creation of super PACs. The first one was Citizens United versus the Federal Election Committee. Citizens United is a conservative nonprofit organization that created the anti-Hillary Clinton documentary during the 2008 presidential primary campaign. The organization was stopped from advertising the documentary on TV on the basis of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Citizens United took the issue to court. The court ruled that the parts of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated the First Amendment rights to freedom of speech because it banned political spending by unions and corporations. This was based on the idea that money is essential to disseminating speech. The ruling specified that while corporate or union-backed groups cannot directly campaign for a candidate, they can use their treasury funds to attempt to persuade voters. The majority of court justices concluded that this type of spending would not lead to corruption. The second court case was SpeechNow.org versus the Federal Election Committee. SpeechNow is a nonprofit that sought to raise money to advocate for or against federal candidates. They questioned the constitutionality of the spending limits being imposed on them. The court case concluded that since independent spending is not seen as corruptive, it should not be limited. Therefore, the spending of donors to organizations like SpeechNow and the spending of the organizations themselves should not be limited. Still, as with PACs, these organizations must report donors to the Federal Election Committee. This new breed of political organizations became known as super PACs.
Well, the thing is, now you only need one very wealthy donor to really become a viable candidate. Right?
Exactly.
We had candidates in the primary process who had just one or two rich backers, such as Newt Gingrich, right? Sheldon Adelson, who had funded him for, I don't know, $10 million or so. He just had that, and that's what he was using to be able to run in the primaries.
Right. To say that, and it is extremely frightening because you think about like the Koch brothers and organizations like that, you know, multi-millionaires or billionaires even, and like you say, now they have that freedom where they can just kind of like, you know, put a stamp and say, you know, you're going to be our candidate. But that being said, it's always been in America, for the most part, it's about money. Rich. I mean, I won't say you have to be a rich man to run because Obama is not. Not really a rich man.
If we're looking at past presidents, you know,
I think that it's all very true. But you know, what it makes me think about is that why is this happening? And this is happening because the Supreme Court ruled this way. And that to me is the biggest travesty of all this mess. Because why? Why did that happen?
We can argue it's been happening before. It's just much more out in the open. They're much more brazen about openly taking up public space and public airtime and expressing or espousing views, trying to influence the average voter.
But we had an actual law that would limit the amount.
They found ways to get around it, I think, before.
In an environment like this, where super PACs are influencing the elections, and citizens, regular citizens like ourselves, are left with very little options to influence the elections, what's the alternative?
Well, maybe it has to do with people you vote in on a local and a state level. I think that may have something to do with it. And
assuming they're more responsive, right?
Right. I think you can possibly have more influence on your representatives on a local and a state level. And I think definitely civil society.
What effect does this have on future elections? Some would argue that it's privatizing politics. So depending on how much you're donating to the super PAC, that will inevitably have an effect on what the outcome of the election will be. The gathering in my place raised some interesting questions about money and politics, so I wanted to speak to some people who might have some insights. I mean, could the court rulings really have such an impact on campaigning, and if so, to what extent?
Citizens United represented a really sharp break from prior campaign finance jurisdiction, which had understood that the government could regulate money in politics. In Citizens United, Justice Kennedy decided that it was only quid pro quo corruption that might be lead to a justification for upholding campaign finance rules.
The law used to be that if you were very wealthy, like George Soros or David Koch or Sheldon Adelson, you could spend an unlimited amount of your own money buying ads that voiced your opinion. But if you and 2 or 3 other people wanted to pool your contributions, you were limited to doing so to a PAC, which is an organization that promotes candidacy or opposes a candidacy. You were limited to $5,000. There was another case, not Citizens United, a case called Speech Now, which basically struck that down.
How can I spend as much of my own money independently as I want, but I can't get together with 2 or 3 of my friends and do the same thing without any limitation? How can that be? And so Speech Now said, yeah, no, that's right. That doesn't make any sense. And so as long as all you're doing is working independently of the candidates themselves, you're not giving money to anybody. You're not making a contribution to a candidate. You're not making a contribution to a party organization. So by itself, that would have meant just plain people. But in combination with Citizens United, which came very close to the same time and said, not only can people do this now, but organizations can do it. Unions and corporations and trade associations and any other kinds of entity can make these same independent expenditures. So now you put these 2 things together. I can't be limited if I join together with a group, and there's no restriction on the source of the funds as long as we're independent. Now you've got the situation that we faced in 2012.
you are unlawfully obstructing vehicular traffic. I order you to leave this roadway now and do so voluntarily.
This is messed up. This means that normal people's voices will not be heard. More than $1 billion is being spent on Romney and Obama's campaign.
And this way my guys are making us
This is illegal by the Supreme Court.
There are a lot of people who reacted to the Citizens United decision by saying corporations aren't people, and therefore corporations shouldn't have the same kind of First Amendment rights as people do, as live human beings do. That's a very, very short-sighted position, especially for liberals to take. Virtually every cause organization is incorporated. If you were part of the civil rights movement, it was carried through the NAACP and other civil rights organizations that were incorporated. Every cause is carried by an organization of citizens whose private contributions support the cause through an organization that was incorporated. So to say that corporations don't have First Amendment rights is to say that the NAACP is not free to speak in the 1960s.
In 2012, the top 3 super PAC spenders were Restore Our Future, American Crossroads, and Priorities USA Action. Between 90 and 100% of spending done by these groups was used for attack ads. So what are the super PACs and what do they do?
Put an end to the politics that would divide a nation just to win an election. Walk the walk.
A new attack ad by a super PAC backing President Obama basically blames Mitt Romney for a woman's death from cancer.
And this ad basically accuses Mitt Romney of practically killing her. Is that the kind of rhetoric you want to hear, especially a president who ran 4 years ago on raising the level of rhetoric?
Well, you do know that we don't have anything to do with Priorities USA.
They're not telling the truth.
We don't have anything to do with Priorities USA. We're not allowed to coordinate with them. We don't have anything to do with Priorities USA.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Super PACs is just a term that was coined to describe political action committees that are independent expenditures only. So there's a lot of ways in which money flows through our system, and in the past it has often gone primarily through either directly through the parties or directly through the candidates themselves. There have also been some outside moves towards outside spending, principally growing in the last decade, but we really hadn't seen too much of a move towards that prior to, of course, the decision in Citizens United.
So let me just quickly encapsulate what the big problem with super PACs is. I mean, the first problem with super PACs is that you are giving very wealthy individuals an opportunity to inject large sums of money into a presidential campaign, and that then makes the candidates more incumbent on appealing to them than appealing to the larger electorate. So that large amount of money is going against the democratic process.
One of the biggest issues that we've seen with super PACs and with the rise of this unlimited contribution vehicle is that they are also a conduit for dark money. What the California Fair Elections Practices and Stephen Colbert have referred to as legal campaign money laundering.
I am proud to announce that I am forming an exploratory committee to lay the groundwork for my possible candidacy for the President of the United States of South Carolina. I'm doing it! Drop 'em, Jimmy! Woo! 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 And with your help, and possibly the help of some sort of outside group that I am not coordinating with, we can explore taking this country back. Thank you. God bless you all, and God bless Citizens United.
Stephen Colbert making headlines this morning. He saw an opportunity when the Supreme Court loosened campaign spending laws, and so now his request will affect other players in the upcoming campaign. This one, no joke.
We won. And so can you. Because I don't know about you, but I do not accept limits on my free speech. I don't know about you, accept the status quo. But I do accept Visa, MasterCard, and American Express. $50 or less, please, because then I don't have to keep a record of who gave it to me. One of the most exciting things I found out about having a super PAC, and it all happened by accident. I just said, maybe we'll let's get the URL colbertpac.com just for fun for my show. And the network called and said, you just bought a political action committee website. Are you really going to get a political action committee? And I said, why do you ask? And they said, because if you do, that could be trouble. And I said, well, then I'm going to do that.
I like that.
But what I found, the most amazing thing is I found out is that there is almost nothing that's against the law when it comes to spending political money.
The Colbert Report did a remarkable job using satire and humor of explaining the inadequacies of the current campaign finance system, demonstrating what a super PAC actually is. How there's this farcical notion that the super PAC is not coordinating with the candidate. And then showing how through the super PAC, then the dark money group where he transferred the money to, and then showing how from the dark money group, it disappears off the face and goes to a charity and no one knows where the money has come from, what it's being spent for. This was happening as he was doing this satire on the air. It was happening in reality.
Thank you so much for being here. John, let me ask something. Are you here to offer to take over Colbert Super PAC?
I'm not even going to diminish. I won't offer. I'm honored. I would be honored. But can I, if I may, can we do this? Because you and I are also business partners.
Yes, we're business
We're about to open up that combination bagel shop.
And travel agency.
Yes. From schmear to eternity. Is there? So I don't know.
Is that a problem? Trevor, is being business partners a problem?
Being business partners does not count as coordination legally.
Great. All right. Well, that's pretty good. Yes.
I assume there's reams of complicated paperwork to be executed before we transfer the reins of power over something as critical to our very foundation of democracy as a super PAC.
And Trevor?
I brought the one document with me.
Oh. Why should everyone care? Because if you're not able or if you feel disempowered as an individual to make a difference or to influence the decision-making process of your elected representatives, chances are you're going to lose faith in the political establishment. And once you lose faith in the political establishment loses legitimacy to govern you. In other words, once the bond between citizens and the government ceases to exist for whatever reason, I mean, the super PACs may be one way of facilitating this this unfortunate process. Because of the way media portrays politicians and because of the way politicians are communicating with the people, the public is becoming cynical of the entire process.